Uh, Great. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Uh, this is a great attendance for us. So thank you so much, everybody, for your participation. We're 1 minute after the hour, so I'm just gonna go ahead and start. Um, my intro will take maybe 4 or 5 minutes of your time, Andrew, but we'll begin with the research after that. So, hi everyone. My name is Robert Driver. I'm a postdoc at Duke University. I want to welcome everyone to the AOS Student Research Grant Seminar Series here. So, just like with the other weeks, I'm going to introduce the seminar series as well as the AOS Student Research Grants real quickly. So, AOS offers funding to students and early career researchers with the AOS Student Research Grants. And each year, the AOS receives over 100 applications for this grant. So this is a highly competitive grant, even compared to other society-based small research grants. So I want to acknowledge the substantial amount of effort that goes into writing a successful proposal. And this is because with the limited budget, winners have to describe a project that will advance the field of ornithology while still remaining feasible as part of a graduate dissertation or related work. So the AOS Student Research Grant Seminar Series, which is where we are today, celebrates the challenging and innovative work of AOS Student Research Grant recipients by sharing this work to AOS members. So each week, if you're new here, we'll showcase the research or research plans of a 2023 or 2022 AOS Student Research Grant winner in a seminar style format. And we have one seminar each week for 15 weeks. This is week 3 until May 5th. And I want to thank everyone for being here for our seminar, and the AOS and the AOS Student Affairs Committee for support and input, and thank Andrew for being here today. So before we turn our attention to Andrew's research, I just want to mention to keep your microphones on mute. I think that's default, actually. If you have any questions, there's time for a Q&A at the end of Andrew's talk, and there's a Q&A box. It's not a chat box like some other Zooms, but you can still type your question just the same in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand and we can unmute you and you can speak your question out. So I want to remind everyone that this is an AOS sponsored event, and all participants have to follow the AOS virtual meeting event code of professional conduct, and I will post a link to the AOS virtual code of professional conduct in the chat. And please be aware that we are recording this talk. And one other thing is we will have a post-seminar evaluation form, which I will also link in the chat. And that's very helpful to us to get feedback about the seminar series so we can continue to improve it. Okay, now for our speaker today, Andrew Dreelin is currently a Ph.D. Candidate in Biological Sciences at Northern Illinois University. And Andrew's academic career began with a BS in biology at Cornell University, working with Dr. David Winkler. Research from his undergraduate work is published in Methods in Ecology and Evolution and Frontiers in Ecology and Evolution. And following graduation, Andrew really gained a wealth of experience with internships, working for New Jersey Audubon, as well as a pelagic observer for NOAA. But then, as an ecology intern at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute in Montana, that's where Andrew's passion for grassland birds really blossomed, I think. And after this internship in 2020, Andrew began his PhD at Northern Illinois University, co-advised by Dr. Holly Jones and Dr. Andy Boyce. And Andrew has many contributions to research in ornithology with papers in Field Ornithology, Wilson Journal of Ornithology, Bulletin of the British Ornithologist Club. And in addition to the AOS Student Research Grant, which we know about because that's why we're here today, Andrew won the Student Research Grant at the Animal Behavior Society as well. And two other small things I want to mention. Andrew received an honorable mention for the NSF GRFP, which is a great accomplishment and a difficult achievement. So I wanted to highlight that. And importantly, if you put all of that to the side for a second, Andrew won the AOS Quiz Bowl at the 2017 meeting. after placing second in 2016. So I think that's really the highlight there. So okay, so with that, I'll turn it over to Andrew for his talk. Interspecific eavesdropping by birds on a keystone mammal increases vigilance towards predators.
Wow, thank you so much, Robert, for the flattering introduction. That is super kind and very thorough. Yeah, way better than I could have done with my intro. We'll just say, of course, Quiz Bowl, very much a team effort. The secret to success in Quiz Bowl is stacking your team with folks who know more about birds than you do. And that's the strategy that I like to employ. So, yeah, without further ado, we'll get underway. I'm super excited to talk to you all today about the fourth chapter of my dissertation work, Interspecific Eavesdropping by Birds on a Keystone Mammal Increases Vigilance Towards Predators. So Robert already gave a great introduction, so I will just really skip through this. But essentially, I just wanted to say thank you, AOS, for the funding and for the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you to Animal Behavior Society as well for funding this research. And of course, the actual research that AOS funded with the student research grant is I'm still working on analyzing that as I race to finish my dissertation. And hopefully you'll be hearing about that maybe in St. Louis or some point in the future. So we'll get underway now. So we're talking to an audience presumably of mostly bird folks, but if you haven't experienced grassland birds or grasslands before, we're going to start with the slide that starts off every grassland bird presentation these days. The grassland birds are in really, really big trouble. So grassland birds are the most steeply declining group of birds in North America. We've lost over 600 million grassland birds since 1970, and that's since 1970, not including, any declines prior to then. So this is really kind of an all hands on deck conservation issue that is happening, across the grassland ecosystem in North America. It's not just one or two grassland birds that are doing quite poorly, grassland birds across the board. So this is really kind of speaking to like an ecosystem level process and problem. So where I like to try and come in now that I am a grassland groupie, just fell in love with this ecosystem, is really trying to bring a community ecology, holistic style approach to this conservation issue. So for context, we know a few things. There are major knowledge gaps in grassland bird life history, in part because American grasslands were drastically altered by European colonization, and they were altered very rapidly before they could be studied adequately. Some of the things that we do know that are really key pieces of information for conservation and habitat management today are that grassland birds co-evolved with grazing and fire, these historical disturbance processes from bison, from fires set by lightning, and also very extensively by indigenous peoples on grasslands. And so these two things really inform a lot of management within remaining grasslands. So doing things like restoring traditional burning practices or restoring bison or implementing improved cattle management grazing programs to maintain habitat quality. So now this is, to me, still just like an existentially somewhat strange thing that I am talking about prairie dogs to a pretty bird-centric audience, and I'm a bird guy, at heart myself. So why prairie dogs? Why am I bringing up, them in this bird-centric talk? Well, it's because they form a disturbance trifecta with fire and mega herbivore grazing on grasslands. So uh, potentially some of our viewers today have been on a prairie dog town and seen prairie dogs before, but if you haven't, it's this really incredible experience where you're walking on this very open, short stature grassland where there's a lot of bare ground. And it kind of feels like being on a prescribed burn in a lot of ways because, yeah, it's very open and the birds that you see on it are associated with very short grass habitats. So, um, the entire suite of grassland birds really responds to different disturbance intensities along this spectrum. And so, if you want to support the entire grassland bird community, you need to maintain a spectrum of disturbance and habitat heterogeneity so that you can have species that, you know, so everyone's habitat preferences can be represented within an ecosystem. And one thing that really blew my mind getting into grasslands as a system is learning about, um, I feel like the story of bison is pretty well out there, that we had, these incredible migratory herds that were overall about 30 million in North America prior to European settlement. But also I learned that, prairie dogs operated at a similar, mind-blowing historical anecdote style, landscape scale impact. And I really love this painting from George Catlin historically that I think captures that sense of what these prairie dog towns were like, because in this photo or this painting they stretch from horizon all the way from the foreground all the way back to the horizon, and that is just kind of a mind-blowing thing. There's historical prairie dog towns that stretch for dozens of kilometers in the study area where I work. And even as late as 1901, there were prairie dog towns that were, stretching for literally hundreds of miles. And or just over, there was one that was 150 miles wide and 250 miles long in the Texas Panhandle as late as 1901. So just this insane landscape level impact. So yeah, and then even prairie dog towns today, where there's still intact colonies, can be very, very large. So you can have prairie dog towns that are several hundred acres in size, and so we're talking like Central Park, size prairie dog towns. So it's a really, it's not just a, isolated little patch. It's a habitat type in its own right. And this habitat type does still exist today, but part of the reason for its collapse, it went through a similar story as bison with European settlement. The major impetus for eradication of prairie dog towns was competition with beef cattle for grass as forage. And so that really pushed for a lot of eradication of prairie dogs by the federal government. You can understand why this might be the case when you see this photo here of shortgrass prairie on the left that is uncolonized by prairie dogs. And then on the right, where there is a prairie dog town, it becomes this very much more open, much more bare ground kind of area. And so you can certainly see the perspective of a rancher who says, those prairie dogs have eaten all the grass that my cows would otherwise eat, that would support our agriculture. And unfortunately, yeah, as part of the settlement process, the United States government poisoned prairie dogs in droves, which also led to the near extinction of the black-footed ferret. And as a result, today, black-tailed prairie dogs only occupy 2% of their historical range. And I also want to point out that this is not a something that just happened historically and now is no longer an issue. This is still a very active management conflict across the American West, anywhere within the range of prairie dogs, and particularly on public land, where public land managers have a multiple use mandate to balance the interests of agriculture and biodiversity conservation. And so this is something that is frequently litigated in on public land. And basically, prairie dogs, while being a keystone species, are also considered varmints without legal protection in many areas. And so they can be freely poisoned or shot with lead bullets in many respects. So basically, once again, trying to bring in some evidence-based management and restoration practices to something that is a big source of management conflict. So, with that context for grasslands historically, grasslands today, prairie dogs historically, and prairie dogs today, that brings us to where we are with my dissertation research and some of the questions that I'm trying to answer. And so, again, as an ornithologist, I'm thinking about how prairie dogs as a keystone species really shape grassland bird life history and demography in ways that could influence their population trajectories, right? If that decline of prairie dogs has also affected a decline or, resulted in declines of grassland birds. So this looks like a really complicated web and network, but basically, yeah, I'm trying to answer questions about how prairie dogs influence nest survival, how they influence chick growth, and how they influence parental behavior of birds. And today we're talking about that parental behavior angle, really focusing on how, yeah, prairie dogs might affect that in a way that could then potentially result in increased nest success or other benefits to demographic parameters. So with that said, yeah, now we'll actually get into kind of the core concept of this chapter. So one of the key things, for anything in ecology is and evolution is predation. It shapes so much. It's classic ecology 101. Predation is a direct and immediate selective pressure. It's very strong, and perceiving predation risk shapes a lot of animal behavior. So, unfortunately, this pigeon did not do such a good job of perceiving predation risk from this peregrine falcon, and then boom, peregrines do what they do, and this pigeon immediate, no more reproduction, nothing else is happening for you, buddy. Sorry. So because predation is this super strong selective pressure, it forces a lot of behavioral trade-offs, right? And we think about this a lot because birds live at such, a fine line energetically. Birds like these red knots in the Delaware Bay are really trying to forage as much as possible so that they can get the energy that they need to continue their migration to the Arctic. But when you've got predators like peregrine falcons around, you can't spend all of your time just foraging and not looking out for yourself. And so, where do you strike that balance between vigilance versus foraging or reproduction or any other activity? You got to maintain that vigilance so that you can, you and your friends can spot that peregrine falcon coming and take evasive action. So, accurately perceiving that predation risk is key to maximizing fitness. And, there's a lot of evidence that that's why birds like these shorebirds will flock up and then engage in their murmurations. That being, together in one big group, again, helps them accurately perceive that predation risk. So, another strategy for obtaining information to accurately perceive predation risk is through eavesdropping. And again, in the bird world, we've got so many great like classic examples of these like cornerstone ecological concepts. So we have birds like chickadees, titmice, and nuthatches that are very vocal, that will spot predators and make alarm calls, and other species will eavesdrop on them and obtain that information and then respond accordingly. Again, there's a lot of evidence that this is a really strong driver for the assembly of mixed flocks, which we all love from a birding standpoint. And again, this really just shows how much predation risk and information transfer around the idea of predation risk is really shaping a lot of factors. So one term that we really use for species like these chickadees and nuthatches, they're making a lot of alarm calls about predators that other species are responding to, is this idea of keystone information producers. So they're producing a large amount of reliable information. Another example would be wolves. It doesn't just have to be about predators. Wolves howling can let other species know about where kills are. Ravens can eavesdrop on that and then, go feed on a bison carcass. So it shapes all kinds of things in ecology, this idea of keystone information producers. So now bringing that back into our grassland system with black-tailed prairie dogs, the most widespread prairie dog species across the Great Plains. So it's a species that lives in high density, very social colonies. You can see one here, again, stretching quite a long distance. However, when you put what are essentially a lot of very fatty and very delicious ground squirrels in one big area together. That is a major hotspot for predators like foxes, badgers, ferruginous hawks, golden eagles, all kinds of things. And so we think of prairie dog towns as these big hotspots of predation risk. Uh, and for birds that live on prairie dog towns, that could potentially be a negative because these prairie dogs are drawing in all of these additional predators. And so through apparent competition, that could increase predation risk on birds. And again, it's a very open habitat. Presumably, it's harder to hide in. At the same time, though, prairie dogs have this very, very sophisticated alarm call network to avoid predators because they live in this colonial society. And so here's a prairie dog barking, and it is nothing quite so elegant as bird song, but essentially prairie dogs have these little barks. That's where their prairie dog name comes from. And if you're walking around on a prairie dog town, it's this incredible experience where you feel like you're triangulated. Everywhere you go on the town, the calls ripple with you wherever you walk. And it's this constant barking. Yep, 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 yep. But there's a language to it. It has actually been pretty decently well studied. We know that there's dialects, across geography, and there's also very specific calls that prairie dogs have for different kinds of predators that so they can identify discrete predators and they respond uh, based on that kind of predator that was identified with an escape strategy, whether it's to like come out of their burrows or go back into their burrows. And so, yeah, it's a pretty robust system. And there's like even like an all clear signal. So yeah, it's some pretty cool stuff. Uh, so with that, and you can, I should also clarify. So it's a pretty loud sound too, and prairie dogs have decent vision, and so you can even encounter or hear prairie dog alarm calls without being on the prairie dog town itself. So like even if you're a couple hundred yards away from a prairie dog town, they can spot a human and start barking at you, and it's audible from quite a long way away. So our core question here for this chapter of my dissertation is, do prairie dog alarm calls help birds with vigilance? And again, as we've kind of talked about in the setup, accurately assessing predation risk is key to improving fitness for any animal. And there has been some great prior work by Michael Wunder and colleagues to show that burrowing owls actually eavesdrop on prairie dog alarm calls and show that they have an increased alarm response to prairie dog alarm calls compared to other vocalizations. And so we were wondering if this happens with other species and whether we can link this to any kind of potential demographic benefit. So again, both grassland birds and prairie dogs have declined and are declining severely. And so we want to understand this community ecology angle to assist with conservation planning. So that brings us to our core focus today for our study species, the long-billed curlews. They are a large migratory shorebird that breeds on the northern Great Plains. They have one nest per season, typically, with a very long incubation period of 27 days. And they do this nest right on the open ground, like a lot of shorebirds. And so they're exposed to a lot of predation risk, potentially from ground-based predators. And something that has been noticed observationally is that curlews are often found nesting in high density near prairie dog towns, and they often spend a lot of time foraging on prairie dog towns. And as part of what we're trying to do with the Great Plains Science Program with Smithsonian is test some mechanisms for this potential association. And as we're aware from a bird audience standpoint, curlews are a conservation priority. Two curlew species have gone extinct in the 20th century. And yeah, this is a tragedy. And so we have to protect the world's remaining curlews. So some of the things that curlews do behaviorally to respond to predators, they have a couple things that we'll go through. One is the classic alarm calls and mobbing. Curlews will wail in response to a predator. and they will also mob, and they're pretty chunky birds, and so a dive bombing curlew can really be quite scary. I was scared when I took this photo, so yeah, it's definitely a real thing. Now another thing that curlews do, we talked about how they've got that open ground nest. They really have some incredible dorsal camouflage to hide themselves on the open prairie. So we'll just take a minute here and see if we've got any pro nest searchers in the crowd who can spot the curlew nest. And this was taken from only a few meters away with an iPhone. The curlew incubating on the nest is somewhere in this picture. And this is also during a very heavy drought, so it's even more bare and open than it often is. So it's kind of a little easier. Um, so yeah, potentially we've had some folks spot it, but if not, I'll go ahead and highlight the curlew here on her nest. And so yeah, curlews have this incredible behavior that we term the cryptic posture, where they just hunker down on the nest and become almost invisible. Truly, it's one of those things where even if you've got precise GPS coordinates for the nest, you still need to have like a little drawing or use some kind of landmark, because once the curlews hunker down, they that camouflage is just absolutely incredible. And so here's a pretty cool illustration of uh, the behavior and what this. So in the top part of the figure, the curlew is in what we just call relaxed posture. So she's sitting on the nest. She has her head, sitting up normally. It could be looking around. It could be tucked into her back if she's sleeping. But yeah, this is this the top reads as calm curlew, and then in this bottom posture, that's the cryptic posture, where the head is pressed flat to the ground. The entire body is pressed deep down into the scrape of the nest, and the back is hunkered up. The bill is almost touching the ground. And what's really nice about cryptic posture is it's a very discrete behavior. So we treat it as like a binary, like zero, in the cryptic or in the relaxed posture, pardon me, zero in the relaxed posture, one in the cryptic posture. It's a pretty distinct transition. It's not a gradual behavior. And so the way that we evaluated the response of the curlews to a potential predator was using just the classic idea of a simulated predator in behavioral ecology. And I'm not a behavioral ecologist by trade, but it said this was a really interesting learning experience. The way that we went about evaluating this was using something that we have lovingly termed the badgernator. So yeah, dummy predators used a lot in behavioral ecology. Badgers are a shared predator of both curlews and prairie dogs. And so we took a stuffed badger and we bolted it and glued it and anything else we could get it to stick to an RC car. And that is what the badgernator looks like. So yeah, and essentially, yeah, credit to the Montana RC car community for giving me a ton of tech support with this thing. I learned they're quite sophisticated electronically and not just toys. But and then thank you to the folks who kindly donated the Badger specimen for us to use here. And a key thing with it was that it has a very long signal range, and so we could stay way far back hidden and actually drive this using while like I'm looking through a spotting scope at it to drive it towards a curlew nest. So here's our experimental design. We had a control trial and a treatment trial. The overall setup here is that once we found a curlew nest, we would flag it or mark the location with a GPS point, and then put a few flags every 50 meters that just essentially marked out a straight line, consistent path that we could follow with the Badgerinator. And then from 150 meters away, we either conducted the experiment out of a camouflaged hunting blind or behind a truck. We considered a truck to be like adequate camouflage and a neutral object because the areas that we were working in were often active cattle ranching or bison restoration operations. So there are trucks moving around here and there, and it's still a very extremely low noise pollution, low human activity environment. And so we've got ourselves positioned 150 meters away in the blind or truck, and then we would place a speaker 20 meters away from the nest, and in the control trials, the speaker would be playing no noise whatsoever. And then in the treatment trial, the speaker would play prairie dog alarm calls, and these prairie dog alarm calls were recorded specifically in response to the badgerinator. So we know that the prairie dogs are saying badger, 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 badger in prairie dog. And we made sure to place the speaker far enough away from the curlew nest that we weren't just getting a response to like a startle response to a loud noise or something like that. We placed it so that it would simulate like a reasonable prairie dog volume to be hearing. And just a couple things for like control purposes. So we only conducted trials during the middle of the incubation period using floating to obtain an age on the eggs so that because later in the incubation period, curlews get angrier as the eggs are about to hatch. So we kind of wanted to standardize that behavioral response by only doing these trials during the middle of incubation. And when we found a given curlew nest, we would randomize the order that we gave the trials in, whether we did treatment first or control first. And yeah, so then essentially our hypothesized response here is we hypothesized that the curlews are going to adopt cryptic posture sooner when essentially when the badgerinator is further away during treatment trials because those prairie dog alarm calls are warning them. At the same time, we also hypothesized that the non-incubating curlew will give alarm calls and mob the badgerinator when it's further away, again, because the prairie dog alarm calls are giving the curlews that early warning. And one other piece I'll say for control purposes, we did these trials only during like from essentially late morning to late afternoon when only the female curlew is incubating and the male curlew is not incubating to standardize like if there were any sex-based differences or potential sex-based differences in a response. So we conducted this work on the Northern Great Plains in Montana, and we did this work on public, private, and tribal land. So I just, of course, thank you to the local ranchers, the public land managers, and the Aani and Nakota nations for allowing us access to these incredible sites where there's still robust amounts of prairie dogs and all kinds of grassland birds because this intact grassland. So yeah. Oh, and one last thing that I need to clarify for experimental design purposes here. Um, we actually conducted these trials off of prairie dog towns. It is possible to find curlews nesting on the prairie dog towns themselves, but they're often usually nesting just off of the prairie dog town where prairie dog alarm calls are still audible. But we needed to do these trials off of the prairie dog towns themselves because if we were doing these trials on the prairie dog towns, we would always be being barked at by prairie dogs. So it would be impossible to actually do an effective control trial. And that's, I think, a testament to just like how robust that alarm call system is. There was no way we were like fooling the prairie dogs either way. So with that said, I will get back to our core question again. So do prairie dog alarm calls help curlews with predator vigilance against predators? And so we wanted to compare the effects of prairie dog playback on when versus non-playback on when curlews decide to alarm call, mob, and adopt cryptic posture. So for our results, we were able to get 14 successful paired behavior trials across 2 field seasons. It's a pretty narrow nesting period for curlews. Nests are quite hard to find, and the harder thing is getting both of those trials done before a predator gets to those curlew nests. So it's always the worst when we would like get one trial done and then be like, all right, we're gonna do the next one, and then we get rained out for a week, and then we come back after that week, and the curlew nest has been predated, and we're like, oh, all that hard work is just gone. But we were pretty happy with getting 14. So it is a small sample size, but essentially, some of the things we saw here in the response, surprisingly, male curlews only gave alarm calls in 43% of our trials overall. Um, and then we also saw that male curlews only mobbed in 21% of control trials and 29% of treatment trials. So this was, given our overall small sample size, this was actually not enough of a behavioral response for us to meaningfully analyze for differences in the control and treatment trials. And often it would be the case that the male curlew was off foraging while the female was on the nest and while we were doing the trial. So I think that's a primary reason why they often wouldn't show up. It also may have been that it wasn't advantageous to kind of make a big ruckus around the nest when you want to keep it secret. So moving on to kind of the female and that cryptic response, one thing that we examined was whether trial order affected the female's cryptic posture initiation distance from the badgerinator. Fortunately, trial order did not affect that. And so the core result really with that female cryptic posture difference is that it did align with our hypotheses. And female curlews, while incubating, hid when the badgerinator was 3 times further away if they were hearing prairie dog alarm calls. This was a significant response across our 14 trials. And so the median cryptic posture the median cryptic posture distance during the control trials was 16 meters. So the badgerinator, we were able to get that badgerinator almost right up to the nest. When there's no prairie dog alarm calls. When there were prairie dog alarm calls, the median distance that the female curlew went into cryptic posture was 49 meters. So it's triple the distance, and we think this is a pretty significant biological effect in terms of increasing the efficiency of the curlew's vigilance in response to a predator. So the conclusions that we really draw from this evidence, so yeah, prairie dog alarm calls did not affect curlew alarm calls or mobbing behaviors while they're nesting. However, curlews did adopt cryptic posture sooner when exposed to prairie dog alarm calls, and so we infer that eavesdropping on prairie dogs improves curlew vigilance against predators. And we think this is really important for things like those adorable little curlew chickies, because this may allow curlews to reduce predation risk at crucial life stages, like nesting or potentially juvenile survival. These benefits could extend outside of the nesting period. However, we have yet to establish a direct link between eavesdropping as a behavior and demographic benefits. We definitely need more research here because of just the limitations of being able to find curlew nests. We don't have quite a large enough sample size, but in the future, we would really like to examine curlew nest survival with respect to distance to prairie dog town edge. I think that would be a really interesting analysis to do, and hopefully we'll be able to have the data to do that in the future. And then my co-advisor, Andy Boyce, is looking at curlew movement in relation to prairie dog towns, so keep an eye out for that work. But we do think that we are building some evidence here that prairie dogs should be considered keystone information producers, and that they have this incredible early warning detection network on their prairie dog towns. And despite them being recognized as a keystone species for many decades now, this has actually not been considered one of their keystone benefits. So we definitely think that a lot more work is needed in the system to further elucidate which species are benefiting from this eavesdropping. And we really think that this or like our idea here is that eavesdropping really could allow birds to mitigate potential costs of being on a prairie dog town by minimizing predation risk, and that allows them to maximize the benefits of being on a prairie dog town, such as taking advantage of that open ground shortgrass habitat that a lot of species like to nest in or forage in because it's very open. So that brings us near to the end here. So I hope I have adequately begun to convince folks of the power of the prairie dog, and that maybe there's some folks in the grassland bird management world out there. So yeah, hopefully we can begin to bring this in from a policy standpoint, because the grassland bird world has done such a great job of making inroads with a lot of the folks who do conservation on grasslands. So yeah, with that, I will wrap up and just say thanks everyone for listening, and thanks to all the different groups and institutions who have supported this research. So yeah, I would happily take any questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Andrew, for that excellent talk. I learned a lot I didn't know about prairie dogs and their impact. Um, And if anyone has a question, you can use the Q&A, which I'm bringing up here, or you can, like I said, raise your hand. You may be able to unmute yourself to ask the question, but if not, raise your hand and I can help out with that. And we'll start out with Stanley Senner, who says, do prairie dogs, I almost said postdocs, do prairie dogs ever eat long-billed curlew eggs or young?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question. So, a lot of small mammals are major predators of bird nests, especially like chipmunks, ground squirrels. However, there's no evidence that prairie dogs eat or consume bird eggs or young. Their diet has been pretty well studied. It is 98% grass. Again, hence the reason for that conflict with agricultural interests. Um, and yes, so ground squirrels, which are, all across grasslands, are major predators of grassland bird nests. However, prairie dogs do not seem to be. Again, there's no evidence for it. And actually, prairie dogs will kill ground squirrels and exclude them from their colonies. So, yeah, um, for whatever reason, yeah, prairie dogs are just all about the grass.
And then I can wait for anyone to type or raise their hand, but I'll just ask. So the the curlew, how many other species are like the curlew prefer bird species prefer foraging around the prairie dogs or nest adjacent to the prairie dogs, or is the curlew unique like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, um, the first chapter of my dissertation is a literature review on everything that we know about the effects of prairie dogs on bird communities, and it just got accepted in Conservation Science and Practice. So stay tuned for that to come out, or keep an eye out. But so there's a handful of bird species that are very close associates of prairie dogs. A pretty straightforward one is burrowing owls. Prairie
Oh well,
dogs
yeah.
make a lot of real estate for burrowing owls. Another are raptors like ferruginous hawks and golden eagles, which are there for dinner. Um, and then probably the closest the shorebird that is actually the closer associate with prairie dogs is the mountain plover. So they uh, prefer to nest on prairie dog towns compared to a lot of other habitat in most of their range, and they have higher like juvenile survival on prairie dog towns compared to other habitat types. And they have their whole crazy breeding biology system of having two separate simultaneous nests that the male and female incubate and raise separately, is thought to be a response to nesting in this high predation risk landscape. Um, and so they're a pretty close associate, but in terms of this edge pattern, um, there has been very little work done on the demography of birds outside of the ones that I just mentioned in response to prairie dog towns. Um, the main things that have really been done are a lot of point counts. So there are species like hornlarks that really like to occupy uh, prairie dog towns. Thick-billed and chestnut-colored longspurs can also be associated depending on the context, but like this is still something that like we're really learning a lot about in terms of like uh, we're trying to move beyond just like the kind of on-off occupancy comparisons. So yeah.
Nice. Thanks a lot. I have follow up, but now we're getting a few questions here, so I'll go in the order that we receive them. So Farzan says, could you please tell your study duration? I think which maybe you mentioned, but yeah, could you tell your study duration?
Yeah, so we had two field seasons for this, and our field season for the basically matches the curlew nesting period. So it's from May 1st to the first week of June, basically.
And Stanley again asks, mountain plovers seem to be in much worse shape than long-billed curlew. Do you think they've suffered more as a result of the widespread depletion of prairie dog towns?
Yeah, great question. I think there's a lot of pretty compelling evidence for that. The study area where I work is also where Stephen Dinsmore and his group, who have done a ton of great research, published on mountain plovers, and they really did a lot to kind of show how closely tied mountain plover occupancy is to the available prairie dog habitat, and that when introduced disease, in this case sylvatic plague, it's basically what white nose fungus does to bats, sylvatic plague does to prairie dogs. It wipes out prairie dog colonies, and mountain plovers respond accordingly. So mountain plover populations decline. Um, so yeah, there's quite a lot of I think there's some pretty strong evidence for that, and I think the grassland bird world really needs to think about um, how we can support and maintain robust prairie dog towns to support species like mountain plover.
Yes, and I just wanted to mention Farzan's question was in the chat in case anyone I was wondering where it was. So, um, and then okay, yes, actually, while we're just comparing mountain plovers and long-billed curlew, I just wanted to have a follow-up, which was, is long-billed curlew preferable for this study if the mountain plover is more in the prairie dog colony and the constant chirping you were talking about? So,
That's precisely why we picked or I would have loved to have done this study on mountain plovers. We'd already been or Andy had already been studying long-billed curlews in this system. So that was one reason. But yeah, essentially with mountain plovers, like it was impossible to get a control because in this system they almost
mm,
exclusively nest on prairie dog towns, whereas with the curlews we have the ability to have that control treatment ability.
got it. Okay. Uh, yes. Okay. So now Brian Suru says, "Thanks for the great talk, Andrew. I'm curious about the fact that the curlews you tested aren't nesting on prairie dog towns, but are still showing evidence of a response to prairie dog calls. So is the curlew response just an innate one to hearing something alarmish, or had those curlews previously spent time around prairie dogs to be exposed to those calls?" Yeah, great question.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Brian. Good to hear from you. So yeah, superb question. And yeah, so I'll add a couple pieces of curlew life history that to me point towards the idea that curlews are consistently exposed to prairie dog alarm calls throughout their life. So a common pattern for curlews is once those chicks hatch, the male curlew will actually take the chicks onto prairie dog towns to feed. And so a lot of juvenile curlews are reared on prairie dog towns where they would be consistently exposed to these alarm calls. And then a lot of throughout curlew migration. Um, a lot of their major stopover areas are areas where there's a lot of prairie dogs, and I guess it would be less the case for curlew wintering, although there are some wintering curlews that would be exposed to prairie dogs. But yeah, I think um, yeah, I would have loved to have tested this on like juvenile curlews that are roaming around on the prairie dog towns, but they're, super hard to find. And again, we wouldn't have really been able to have that comparative context because they spend so much time on prairie dog towns. So yeah, to me that points towards um they're exposed to it, and those parent curlews certainly would have, heard uh prairie dogs a lot, both in the system when they're breeding there and potentially previously in their lives. But I think it's also like not a bad idea either that there is just a potentially innate response to this alarm call, because it is just like a pretty hard to be unaware of thing. So yeah, definitely something that someone fund more research.
Okay, and Sarah Kennedy asks, does the amount of disturbance influence how much long-billed curlews respond to prairie dog alarm calls, or do they only nest in one type of grassland slash disturbance?
Good question. So yeah, in terms of the curlew habitat preferences, they typically uh, prefer short stature um, grasslands that do have heavy grazing intensities, and they are compatible with like heavy cattle grazing. Um, and if grass gets too dense, or the grassland gets too shrubby, curlews won't nest there as much. That's definitely something uh, that I believe that is out there in the literature, and it's also something that I've observed, is like just worked in that system long enough to see some grasslands get long and curlews kind of cease nesting in that area. Um, so, but there is still like a definitely a spectrum of disturbance intensity that they can occupy. It's pretty rare for like a grassland bird to just be in a narrow band. Um, and yeah, that in terms of like the how much vegetation height may influence like a potential predator response from the curlews, that's a great question, and that's something that we haven't tested. I would certainly love to yeah, have that. Yeah, it's just one more thing to follow up on. But yeah, that again, there is totally a visual aspect there, potentially as well, that like by nesting on a prairie dog town, you might be more exposed. But if you're really well camouflaged, you might be able to spot predators a long way away and get up off your nest and then come back to it once those predators have gone. That's what mountain plovers do.
And I have just looking to see if there's more questions. I have one more question along the lines of what everyone like of, could you test this? You know, if there was an infinite amount of time and resources and everything. But I appreciated the amount of time you spent explaining the controls and the design of the study with the badginator and the sound. But could and the difficulty of putting two having two trials on the same nest as you were describing. But I was wondering if a good control is uh, a a sound that is maybe not even from a prairie dog, some random sound, and then bringing the badginator in to really show that it's the prairie dog vocalization in particular. And
Yeah,
then yeah,
yeah, that is definitely something that in retrospect, I would have preferred to have done. Is that in that control trial, just play like a neutral noise, like the song of like a long spur or something. And we simply didn't think of it in the moment. I'm not like a behavioral ecologist by trade. This was just like
yeah.
an interesting thing for us to do. I think part of the reason why that we didn't think of doing that neutral noise is that in the we had a pilot season before this, and we were trying to actually um, use for our control trial. We were actually had replaced the Badger with a pheasant that was mounted to the same RC car. And essentially like using that to see if we could like get the prairie dog alarm to like fake out the curlew
Mm,
that it was like the pheasant was a predator. However, it ended up being unfeasible to just do that many trials with like how much more that would have like complicated our studies then. But yeah, I definitely think it would be worthwhile like to repeat this study without with a neutral noise. Um but yeah, basically our way of just like covering for that is um like we did see like a number of instances where like there was just a noise that was like foreign to a curlew, whether it was like a truck driving by or a plane flying overhead, and they would just immediately hunker in response to it. Um and so like in my mind, placing the speaker far enough back that we're not creating that startle response.
mm.
And like all the other work that's been done on the prairie dog vocalization system to me, like is saying like this is because this is that alarm call. But yeah, there's definitely like way like an additional level of rigor that could be taken with this system. So yeah, I would if I could, I would love to keep, testing aspects of this.
No, that's yeah, that your pheasant or even the RC car with nothing on it, that would be like the equivalent of what I'm describing in the speaker. So, uh, yeah, it's good you guys considered that, but I understand it takes a lot of work. Brian says very cool. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Farzan says thanks for sharing your knowledge. Amanda, I guess you can see these two. Says great to learn more about your research, Andrew. Thanks for presenting and good luck finishing your PhD.
Oh, thank you.
Farzan actually asked, I missed this, has this research been published? And we were talking about that. I think it's upcoming, right? So,
Yeah, so I just submitted this research to Animal Behavior. Yeah, it's in peer review now, and yeah, so these results are definitely still under review. Yeah, they've not been through the peer review process, but hopefully at some point in the future they will have been and will be published.
yeah, so keep a lookout, everybody, for Andrew's upcoming and continuing research here. And we're right about at the hour, so great timing. And thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your work and uh, all the effort, all the field work that went into it. Sorry, I'm distracted. We have another question on why didn't you control without a badger, but we just talked about that. Um, yeah, I'll see everybody here next week for our next AOS research seminar. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for listening, everyone.